welcome to Peru.
Thank
Frank
you.
Lowenstein, climate change adaptation project leader for the Nature Conservancy worldwide, and a member of our Energy and Climate Partnership with the Americas program, which is a series of fellows, senior scientists, American scientists, who have offered their services to converse, to chat, to share their ideas and experiences with their colleagues and with the public of throughout the Americas. And with that in mind, we're delighted you're here. I know you're coming for a conference called Interclima, and also speaking at universities in Peru. What is climate change adaptation in a nutshell for you, and what does it mean for Peru?
So there's this idea out there that there are three choices that we have facing the climate change that has begun already and is going to accelerate over the next 30 to 50 years. We can mitigate, reduce our emissions. We can adapt. We can change our behavior so that climate change has less impact on us, or we can suffer. The idea of adaptation is simply to reduce the extent to which we must suffer. Within the Nature Conservancy, we're strong believers that existing natural systems, forests, floodplains, mangroves, coral reefs, provide benefits today. They help protect people today, and that we should take action to protect those resources so they can continue to provide those functions as climate changes around them.
Wonderful. So it's a nature-based protection system that you're preaching and promoting and talking about.
Yes, and that we're working to demonstrate in real places around the world too.
Can those natural systems be regenerated out of their absence? In other words, if they've been destroyed, can they be rescued from apparent wastelands? Can they be made into functioning, useful, planet-saving systems?
Sometimes, yes. So, for example, we have built coral nurseries in the Bahamas and in Florida, and are working on one now in the Grenadine Bank region. And these are, places where essentially you grow corals on bits of stone, and then you can transplant them out to help rebuild coral reefs in places where they've been damaged. With oyster reefs, which are more of a cooler water system ecosystem, we've actually placed bags of oyster shells out into the water so that they form a substrate that the young oysters can settle on and attach and grow. And we've built new oyster reefs where none used to be. And similarly with mangroves, mangroves are among the easiest ecosystems to restore. If you can remove the stresses, be they pollution or land clearing or perhaps shrimp farming, and restore the substrate to the right elevation, the mangroves almost restore themselves. Now the good thing about natural systems in general is they are used to a certain level of fluctuation. They have a certain natural adaptive capacity. So for example, mangrove reefs, coral reefs, oyster reefs all can accrete, they can grow in height with a certain pace of sea level rise. And so they can continue to provide that function, that protective function to the people behind them, even as sea level rises. To some extent, you can overwhelm the pace at which they can grow, and then that's a problem.
It's cheery and optimistic. I mean, at least I feel cheered by what you just said. And
good. Me too.
Because I sometimes think perhaps too much about the tipping point and that we've crossed it, or we've gone over the edge, and we're hurtling in this void and all these sorts of dark thoughts. But I think what you're saying, that yes, we can stop and rescue and fix, and that's a very good message, a very inspiring message. At least it inspires me. Tell me about the projects that in which Nature Conservancy has been working in the region in South America. I mean, I know you're working in Colombia, in Peru, And what lessons have you learned from those projects in terms of that can be shared with other countries around the world, other peoples, and as they plan their adaptation strategies?
Yeah. First of all, everywhere we work in South America and Latin America in general, we work closely with partners, both regional partners and local partners. So I don't want to say that any of this work is the Nature Conservancies alone.
Right.
But in Colombia, in the Valle de Cauca, we have been working with a water fund that has been established there. And maybe I should take a step back and briefly describe water funds. Water funds are a program that developed here in South America. The very first one was in Quito, that links downstream water users with the people who own and manage the land in upstream headwaters areas to help them maintain the flow of water and maintain the quality of the water coming to the downstream users. Essentially, it's a structure whereby the downstream users can pay for the management that provides them the benefits that they need. So in the Valle de Cauca, we have been working with the Agua por la Vida Water Fund to think about climate change and how is climate change going to affect the services that the water fund needs to provide. Now, in some parts of the world, climate change is going to bring a drier climate, a more arid climate. Sometimes even as more rain falls, which is a very odd concept. So you can have more rainfall, but if you have higher temperatures so that more of that water is evaporating, the amount of water that's available for people, for the soil, for plants, for forests, may be reduced even as more rain falls. So this increasing aridity is going to be a global problem in many areas. Other places are going to face just a massive amount of more rain. And then there are places where you'll have both problems. You'll have more rain, and so you may have more floods, more disasters, but at the same time you may have increasing aridity. So you have more floods but less water for your crops, the worst of both worlds. So the question was, what's the situation in the Valle de Cauca? And so we worked with CIAT in Colombia to analyze and downscale the global climate models, the global circulation models, to provide very specific estimates of future rainfall in the Valle de Cauca and in the subwatersheds of the Valle, and how those were going to change. We ran that across all the different global circulation models that have been certified by the IPCC. And the great thing from the point of view of actually designing an adaptation strategy was in that location, all 16 models predicted the same direction of change. They all said it's going to get significantly wetter. So, we don't need, in that location, we don't need strategies to deal with drought, but what we need is strategies to deal with flood. And so we've been working now with the communities to see which strategies that we could implement they would think would be feasible, that they would think would be acceptable, would fit with their lifestyle and their economy. And we're narrowing in, I think, on silvopastoral systems for agriculture, where you essentially graze under a partial forest canopy. And actually you can increase milk and meat production at the same time that you reduce erosion and flow of water off of the land. So that's an example of the kind of projects we're doing. Another climate adaptation example is a little bit out of South America, still in Latin America, in our Chiapas work. There is a problem with drought. Chiapas gets a lot of rain. It gets a meter of rain in much of the area, up to 4.5 meters. Sorry, I said a meter of rain. 3 meters of rain. 3 meters of rain in some areas, up to 4.5 meters in the very highest elevations. That rain all comes in the wet season, and much of it comes in hurricanes. And so very, very heavy rainfall. Well, now the dry season has gotten longer, It's expanded by about 2 months. So instead of having a 6-month dry season and a 6-month wet season, they now, for the last decade or so, have been having more like an 8-month dry season and a 4-month wet season. And so those rains are even more intense, and meanwhile the vegetation degrades during that extended dry season, so you have miles and miles and miles of bare red earth. And then when the rains come, it all just washes down the hill. Well, down the hill are the villages where the ganaderos live, but also down the hill are 4 reservoirs that provide 10% of Mexico's electricity. And so those floods are a problem locally for the ranchers, and they're a problem down the hill for the reservoirs and the Federal Electric Commission. So we're working again in that system to implement a sort of a improved agricultural system. Silvopastoral systems are part of the picture. Banks of grazing material that aren't that are sort of reserved for the dry season are another part of the picture. Improved storage of food for the cattle for the dry season, so that the cattle don't have to be out there combing the land, eating every last stalk of grass in the dry season and creating these miles of red earth. So again, we're reducing erosion and flooding. And I talked to farmers in Chiapas this past April, and they would say things to me that, you know, their production of milk had increased 2 veces, which was, you know, really wonderful to hear that these systems that are reducing their local disaster risk, it's reducing the risk to their village, it's also reducing the risk down the hill to the reservoirs, and it's increasing their incomes. One fellow told me he had given up his trucking business that he had run with his son because he didn't need it anymore. Now he could make enough just with his cattle, which he loved.